Forget the myth of the unbeatable dynasty. Historical inheritance is a dark joke elites try to hide. The world's greatest empires were handed to overgrown toddlers who treated them like cheap toys. Prepare to watch unbreakable lineages burn to the ground faster than a drunk guy playing with illegal fireworks. We're talking magical soldiers, horse politicians, anti-smoking heirs, and musical toothbrushes. 1. The coal fortune funded a circus. Harry Thaw inherited an industrial coal empire and funneled every single penny into a terrifying legal reality show after publicly murdering a renowned architect. A man commits a horrific crime in front of a giant crowd, grabs his family's wealth, and turns it into an endless spectacle just to dodge a jail cell. He liquidated a blue-chip company just to sponsor his own premium defense podcast. He bought psychiatrists, bullied witnesses, and buried the justice system under an avalanche of cash. The empire collapsed into legal fees. Thaw transformed an army of hard-working miners into unwitting extras in his psychotic courtroom drama. He didn't care about the family legacy. He walked free while the industrial titan withered into dust. Think about that for a second. The greatest coal fortune in history bought a giant get-out-of-jail-free card. Privilege remains undefeated. Could you afford your own murder trial? 2. He tossed the crown away. Edward VIII inherited the largest empire on earth and abandoned the throne in under a year because the government wouldn't let him marry an American divorcee. The king looks at the ultimate geopolitical cheat code, spots a few minor marriage restrictions, and throws the British Empire in the trash like a defective toy. He pulled the ultimate rage quit from the world's most exclusive chief executive job just because human resources denied his +1 to the company gala. Politicians pleaded with him, bishops fumed, and the public watched their untouchable sovereign pack his bags for a life of aimless luxury. He didn't want the responsibility. He traded global supremacy for a golf handicap, a tailored suit, and a permanent frown. He walked away from battleships, royal palaces, and total geopolitical dominance just to sulk in endless Parisian exile. Love conquers logic and destroys kingdoms. What a pathetic downgrade. 3. Disarming warlords doesn't work. Inheriting the ruthless Ming dynasty, Emperor Jianwen instantly antagonized his fully armed uncles, triggering a fatal civil war. The new boss walks into the palace and tries to fire the senior executives who literally own the building's security forces. He canceled the company's military defense contracts by sending a polite eviction notice to a private army. Jianwen thought a fancy imperial title provided bulletproof armor against seasoned military veterans. His uncles commanded actual troops, held genuine grudges, and possessed swords, shields, and unyielding ambition. The young emperor sat in his throne room, drafting polite administrative decrees while rogue generals marched an angry army straight through the front door. He couldn't see the danger. The capital burned, his entire reign vanished in smoke, and the uncle he tried to fire took his glorious seat. Arrogance kills instantly. 4. Isolation breaks the mind. Sultan Ibrahim spent his whole life trapped in a paranoid palace cage, inheriting the Ottoman Empire psychologically shattered and obsessed with absurd luxury. The supreme ruler ignored the complex administrative machinery grinding to a halt, prioritizing huge furs, exotic perfumes, and enormously overweight concubines. They locked a guy in a basement for 30 years and suddenly handed him the nuclear launch codes and an unlimited shipping account. He didn't know how to rule. While the Navy suffered defeats and the treasury bled gold, Ibrahim demanded his advisors scour the globe for the largest women alive. He covered the palace walls in sable fur, drowning statecraft in overwhelming sensory overload. The military elite watched the empire rot from the inside, realizing their ruler lived on a different planet. State business died while the Sultan played dress-up. Insanity won the day. Does extreme isolation create insane rulers? 5. A fancy title means nothing. Jonathan Guinness carried a legendary, rock-solid, old-money surname but walked straight into a catastrophic corporate scam that evaporated millions. Aristocratic composure doesn't magically replace due diligence. Financial sharks casually strolled into the boardroom, smiled nicely, and walked away with the family vault. He clicked a billionaire phishing link because the email address looked vaguely respectful. The crooks promised infinite returns, dazzling the noble heir with complex jargon, forged charts, and hollow flattery. Guinness smiled, nodded, and handed over the keys to a generational fortune without asking a single hard question. He couldn't spot an obvious trap. The fraudsters vanished across the globe, leaving the aristocrat holding an empty bag and a shattered reputation. Generations of careful brewing and calculated investing disappeared into thin air over a polite handshake. Fools lose everything. 6. Envision strapping diamonds to a dog. Evelyn Walsh McLean inherited a colossal mining fortune, bought the cursed Hope Diamond, and threw 1920s parties so unhinged her pets wore priceless gems. She treated an industrial fortune like an infinite magical fountain, ignoring the hard truth that actual money eventually runs out. She funded the unlimited prop budget of a giant music video that ends with the director filing for brutal bankruptcy. McLean hosted spectacular galas paraded around high society and treated multi-million-dollar gems like cheap plastic costume jewelry. She threw cash at every fleeting whim, turning a terrifying industrial empire into a shiny, shallow circus act. The mines kept digging, but her daily spending outpaced the earth itself. She couldn't stop buying glitter. She died surrounded by legendary rocks while the family accounts choked and gasped for air. A spectacular financial ruin. 7. Boring wealth wasn't enough. Huntington Hartford took the indestructible grocery fortune and drained it through bizarre side quests like a handwriting institute and a bleeding cash Bahamian resort. Boring rich person mistakes failed to satisfy him. He needed elite, highly customized methods of setting his generational wealth on fire with confident precision. Hartford turned a money printing machine into an automated subscription service for funding terrible indie projects. He bought prime real estate, launched awful art galleries, and burned millions trying to prove his genius to a world that just wanted cheap produce. The grocery empire funded his delusions of grandeur until the corporate vaults echoed with emptiness. He treated his family's sweat and blood like a casual casino chip, betting on losing horses until the pit boss permanently kicked him out into the cold street. He just wouldn't stop spending. Arrogance destroys generational wealth. 8. The dictator lacked the terrifying vibes. Inheriting the English protectorate from his ruthless father, Richard Cromwell possessed zero charisma, zero army respect, and lost the Republican experiment in 9 months. He stepped into a military dictatorship powered by his dad's iron grip, realized he had none, and watched the whole government sag like wet cardboard. A polite substitute teacher tried to take over a maximum security prison using only a gentle tone of voice. Richard sat in meetings offering soft suggestions while battle-hardened generals openly laughed right in his face. He lacked the killer instinct, the political ruthlessness, and the basic ability to inspire genuine fear. He couldn't command a single room. The military simply folded their arms, shook their heads, and sent him packing before the year even finished. He packed his bags, fled the spotlight, and let the historical monarchy walk right back in. Could you lose a country in months? 9. Ruling from land felt too boring. Ptolemy IV inherited Egypt at its historical peak, handed the actual governing to his clique, and spent his time on a giant theatrical royal barge. He built a floating party mansion while the foundations of the dynasty quietly rotted away underneath him. He treated the ancient world's greatest breadbasket like an exclusive premium lounge on a luxury cruise ship. While the ambitious ministers drafted laws and generals plotted treason, the pharaoh hosted endless banquets, floating up and down the Nile in glorious oblivion. He ignored local famine, ignored the shifting political alliances, and focused on maintaining his daily buzz. He didn't care about the peasants. The golden era shattered, replaced by fierce corruption and slow decay, all because the guy in charge preferred the gentle rocking of a boat over the heavy weight of a crown. He partied while Egypt slowly burned. Lazy kings finished last. 10. The ultimate war machine logged out. Selim II inherited a vast empire from Suleiman the Magnificent, outsourced the heavy fighting, drank wine all day, and died slipping in a bathhouse. The transition from the greatest military commander in history to a guy who essentially ignores reality and fatally slips on wet marble is breathtaking. He inherited a prestigious racing empire and died because he tripped over the catering table in the VIP tent. Selim preferred the quiet comfort of his lavish harem over the brutal, dusty reality of the battlefield. He wouldn't lift a real sword. The Ottoman war engine ran on autopilot while the Sultan chased the bottom of a bottle. A minor misstep on a slippery floor erased him from existence, turning a dreaded sovereign into a humiliating historical footnote. He traded a mighty conqueror's sword for a fragile wine glass and paid the most deeply embarrassing price. Slippers defeated the mighty Sultan, a tragic wet floor, a tragic 11. He invented a gun for wasps. Sir George Sitwell treated his vast wealth as a personal research grant for unhinged inventions, building a musical toothbrush and a tiny pistol for shooting insects. He surrendered all aristocratic power to sit in a giant mansion engineering complex, mechanical revenge on household bugs. He became a one-man tech incubator funding products designed for cartoon villains. Sitwell ignored local politics, ignored his screaming family, and locked himself in his study to wage a private war against garden pests. While his dignified peers debated global trade, this visionary tightened the screws on a miniature firearm designed for a very specific buzzing target. He couldn't handle real-world problems. His generational wealth vanished into absurd patents, bizarre blueprints, and useless metal contraptions. He turned a historic legacy into a surreal comedy sketch. Bugs won the war. 12. Ego demands an audience. Inheriting the golden era of the Roman peace, Commodus ignored administration to play gladiator, decapitate ostriches, and demand live-action worship. He forced the terrified Roman Senate to sit in the bloody arena, desperately trying not to laugh, while the emperor cosplayed as Hercules against defenseless zoo animals. The chief executive of a tech giant ignored the flagship product to force the board of directors to watch his terrible one-man improv show. Commodus treated the imperial treasury like a personal costume budget. He butchered exotic birds, swung his sword at the air, and expected thundering applause from aging politicians holding their breath. He wouldn't accept any genuine criticism. Rome burned in the background while the ruler flexed his oiled muscles in the dirt. He shattered a pristine era of peace just to feel like a formidable tough guy. Theater killed the empire. Vanity is a disease. 13. The frat party never stops. The last family heir to run the Anheuser-Busch beer fortress brought a heavy partying reputation right as the legendary empire was swallowed whole by foreign rivals. He didn't smash the dynasty with a hammer, but he projected frat boy energy while a corporate spreadsheet quietly sharpened a knife to end family control. He played the ultimate disc jockey track while the bank officially foreclosed on the nightclub. August wore the crown but forgot how to defend the castle. While he lived the lifestyle of a famous rock star, ruthless executives calculated the exact moment to launch a hostile takeover. The family legacy dissolved into a giant corporate merger. The iconic Clydesdale horses marched straight into the hands of a multinational conglomerate. The beer kept flowing, but the crown changed hands forever. Corporate suits always beat parties. 14. Railroad profits taste great. Reginald Vanderbilt treated the Titanic family fortune as an immortal machine, violently consuming it through gambling, horses, and alcohol until he died young. The first generation builds an industrial juggernaut. The second generation assumes the machine is magic and literally drinks the railroad profits until the bank accounts collapse. He treated his ancestral trust fund like a bottomless coffee refill at a diner that's secretly charged by the sieve. Reginald sat at the card table tossing away locomotives, train tracks, and steel empires like loose pocket change. He lived fast, drank hard, and refused to look at a ledger. The sheer velocity of his spending broke the unbreakable family vault. He couldn't stop his self-destruction. He drank a colossal transportation monopoly down to the very last drop, leaving nothing but empty bottles and giant debts. An elite financial meltdown. Can you gamble away a literal railroad? 15. Inheriting a vast tobacco empire built on addiction, Patrick Reynolds relentlessly spent his whole life dismantling the industry as an anti-smoking activist. Instead of wrecking his legacy out of sheer stupidity like everyone else, he looked at the toxic money machine and decided to deliberately dismantle its moral prestige. He inherited the Death Star and handed the structural blueprints to the Rebel Alliance out of common decency. Reynolds stood in front of cameras, denounced his own bloodline, and testified against the product that bought his clothes. He turned his inherited microphone into a weapon against the very factories that generated his trust fund. He wouldn't let the poison spread. He burned the family brand to the ground with devastating medical facts and relentless public campaigns. He proved that sometimes the best way to honor a dirty legacy is to crush it into dust. A beautiful, intentional ruin. Heroism requires brutal betrayal. 16. A sweaty game of tennis ended a bloodline. Inheriting a strong French kingdom, Louis X played medieval tennis so intensely that he drank cold wine, fell ill, died, and sparked a dynastic crisis. I'm not making this up. A geopolitical nightmare and the destabilization of a Central European power happened because a sweaty 20-something couldn't hydrate properly after demanding sports. A global superpower collapsed because the prime minister drank a slushie too fast after a brutal fitness session. The king walked off the court, grabbed a freezing goblet of wine, and chugged his way straight into an early grave. The royal physicians panicked, the court spiraled into chaos, and the direct line of succession snapped like a cheap string. A simple throat chill tore the fabric of French royalty apart, leading straight to decades of endless bloody wars. Hydration is serious business. 17. Her fortress was an illusion. Billed as the richest woman in Africa, Isabel dos Santos saw her vast Angolan business network instantly collapse into frozen assets the exact second her president father left office. She masqueraded as a brilliant, self-made capitalist genius, only to discover the market is brutal when the state military doesn't enforce your business contracts. Her financial empire was a rented Halloween costume the government violently repossessed at midnight. She sat in boardrooms projecting an aura of invincibility, pretending her business acumen earned those billions. The moment the political shield dropped, the international investigators rushed in. Bank accounts froze, and the genius narrative shattered into pieces. She proved that building an empire on nepotism leaves you standing naked in the freezing wind when the music finally stops. The costume ripped apart. 18. While Rome burned, the emperor mourned a bird. Emperor Honorius panicked during the Visigoth sack of his historic city because he thought his pet chicken named Rome had died. The Western world is literally burning to ash, and the man in charge breathes a sigh of relief when he realizes millions of citizens are dying, not his favorite poultry. He watched his corporate headquarters explode and smiled because his pocket digital pet survived the violent blast. Barbarians smashed through the ancient gates, slaughtered the helpless guards, and looted centuries of priceless treasure. Honorius sat safely in a distant swamp palace, petting a literal chicken and ignoring the agonizing death of human civilization. He couldn't care less about humans, focusing his tiny mind on birdseed and soft feathers. The empire shattered, but the royal coop remained perfectly secure. Unmatched executive detachment. A pathetic final leader. 19. Fairy tales required giant budgets. Ludwig II inherited Bavaria but preferred private myth-making, pouring catastrophic state funds into absurdly beautiful fairy tale castles until his deposition. The ruler refused to do paperwork, opting to bankrupt the state by acting like an over-budget art director, building fantasy theme parks in the mountains. He governed a country with the financial discipline of a theater kid who stole a platinum credit card at a giant amusement park. Ludwig ignored his ministers, ignored the rumbling threats of war, and spent his nights sketching swan-shaped boats and glittering caves. He built monuments to his own romantic imagination, while the treasury accountants wept openly in the hallways. He wouldn't listen to reason. The government finally snapped, declared him insane, and took the keys away. Reality always crushes the dreamer. Art demands heavy prices. 20. The mafia boss preferred meditation. Inheriting Russia from Ivan the Terrible, Fyodor I was obsessed with church bells, letting the state slide away and his dynasty end. He inherited an empire forged in terror and blood, but decided to ring bells and smile vacantly while his relatives quietly stole the government. He took the keys to a ruthless armed mafia cartel and turned it into a silent, peaceful meditation retreat. Feodor wandered the palace grinning at the sky while ambitious nobles carved up the map like a roasted pig. He lacked the spine, the venom, and the basic ambition required to survive the ruthless Russian court. He couldn't hurt a fly. The relentless machinery of his father's brutal regime rusted away while the gentle Tsar listened to the soothing chimes of the cathedral. His weakness invited an era of devastating chaos, starvation, and endless civil war. Being nice is fatal. 21. Glamour destroys logic. Bored with the hyper-profitable Seagram liquor empire, Edgar Bronfman Jr. sold golden assets to buy into Hollywood, ultimately destroying the family fortune. He looked at a flawlessly engineered, infinitely profitable machine, decided it lacked cool factor, and traded it for the expensive, chaotic vanity of movie studios. He sold a guaranteed winning lottery ticket to buy a tiny stake in a failing influencer's video house. Bronfman traded a rock-solid beverage monopoly for the privilege of walking red carpets and taking meetings with demanding actors. The reliable liquor money burned up in the furnace of entertainment egos and terrible box office returns. He traded generational security for a brief moment in the flashing camera lights. He just couldn't resist the fame. The empire evaporated, leaving the family to wonder what happened to the endless flow of cash. Vanity is expensive. Would you trade steady billions for Hollywood? 22. Party through the warnings. Inheriting France at its peak, Louis XV lived for luxury and factional politics, casually bankrupting the state and setting the stage for revolution. He saw the cracks forming in the absolute monarchy and shrugged, deciding to party through the sirens and leave the catastrophic bill for his grandson. He ordered the expensive lobster, drank the vintage champagne, and jumped out the bathroom window before the waiter brought the check. Louis built lavish private retreats, funded useless wars, and ignored the starving peasants gathering at the gates. The treasury bled dry to support endless court drama, while the national debt ballooned into an inescapable monster. He wouldn't face the consequences, enjoying the ultimate ride, ensuring his successors would face the bloody guillotine. Generational theft at its finest. Laziness doomed a nation. 23. Overconfidence is a death sentence. Atahualpa won the vast Inca Empire in a brutal civil war, only to lose it immediately by walking into an ambush set by 168 Spaniards. He commanded tens of thousands of warriors, but fundamentally misread the danger of a tiny foreign force, letting his entire system shatter in one afternoon. He won the championship game and got knocked out by a random tourist in the stadium parking lot. The emperor strolled into the plaza projecting total divine authority, only to face crude gunpowder, steel swords, and ruthless deception. The Spanish grabbed him, paralyzed the chain of command, and demanded a room filled with gold. He didn't expect dirty tricks. The invincible ruler fell into a crude trap, proving that immense numbers mean nothing against unpredictable new tactics. An ancient empire vanished in mere minutes. A tragic historical miscalculation. 24. Bad optics invite assassins. Inheriting a France torn by religious wars, Henry III curated an extravagant aesthetic, with elite favorites and lapdogs ending up assassinated. While his country violently tore its own throat out over faith, the king busied himself with fashion shows, complex accessorizing, and collecting tiny dogs. He walked into a burning fireworks factory and loudly critiqued the interior design. Angry nobles plotted rebellion, rogue armies marched through the provinces, and Henry focused on his delicate royal entourage. The optics of a perfumed monarch playing with pets while the population starved proved fatally out of touch. His lack of situational awareness turned him into a walking target. He couldn't read the room. A fanatic finally drove a knife into his gut, ending a reign defined by terrible priorities. A blade ended the runway show. The dogs outlived him. 25. Unleashed chaos is expensive. Caligula inherited an overflowing treasury and violently burned through it, turning his rule into a humiliating death wish performance art. He realized the Roman Empire existed just to fund his chaos, acting like making a horse a politician was a normal administrative flex. He took over a stable hedge fund and used the capital to fund a circus where he personally insulted the investors. Caligula threw mountains of gold into the sea, built giant floating bridges just to ride across them, and tormented the powerful men standing directly behind him. He treated the ancient world's greatest superpower like a personal sandbox, demanding worship while rapidly emptying the bank. He wouldn't stop poking the bear. The Praetorian Guard finally decided they preferred a boring, solvent empire over a bankrupt comedy club. They ended the joke with sharp steel. The horse lost the election. Insanity met the sword. 26. Action over words. Born into immense automotive wealth, Horace Dodge Jr. avoided all discipline, spending his life on speedboats, parties, and a steady stream of serial marriages. He confused having money with having a purpose, taking an industrial fortress and turning his existence into an unsupervised vacation. He took a rugged Detroit engine and tried to install it inside a luxury inflatable pool toy. Horace threw away millions on extravagant divorces and custom racing boats while the actual family business faded into the background. He coasted on the sweat of his ancestors, treating the heavy machinery of the automotive boom like a personal cash machine for his yacht club lifestyle. He bought endless thrills, drank endless liquor, and left behind a legacy of unapologetic uselessness. He just didn't care about work. He crashed the family engine. Speedboats replaced the assembly line. Wealth spoiled the air. 27. A spreadsheet killed the beer. Peter Stroh inherited a surviving American brewing dynasty and destroyed it by borrowing recklessly to buy rivals in a brutal market. No assassins or palace coups were needed, just sheer corporate hubris turning a legendary family asset into a debt-soaked cautionary tale via terrible acquisitions. He took out 3 separate mortgages to buy fake internet currency because a podcast host told him confidence equals revenue. Stroh ignored the limits of reality, scaling up the company on a fragile mountain of borrowed cash. He wouldn't listen to the accountants. When the market shifted and the debt collectors knocked, the mighty brewing empire collapsed like a cheap aluminum can. The legendary brand vanished from the shelves, swallowed by better-managed giants. He gambled a multi-generational legacy on a deeply flawed growth chart. Math destroys the arrogant. 28. Wizards provide terrible defense. Inheriting the Song dynasty mid-invasion, Emperor Qinzong ignored his generals and trusted a local wizard, promising magical soldiers to defend the capital. The enemy hammers down the gates, and instead of deploying actual troops, the emperor chooses fantasy vibes and waits for supernatural reinforcements. He tried to put out a roaring house fire by throwing astrology crystals at the flames and hoping for the best. The invading army scaled the walls with steel and fire, while the emperor sat back expecting mystical warriors to descend from the clouds. He didn't want to fight a real war. The magical army never materialized. The city fell, the dynasty shattered, and Qinzong was dragged away in chains by extremely real, unmagical captors. He traded military strategy for a cheap parlor trick and lost everything. Delusion guarantees defeat. Would you trust a wizard over generals? 29. He became the mascot of ruin. Thor Batista didn't manage the empire, but his fatal supercar crash and privileged bodybuilder lifestyle became the grotesque public face of his father's collapsing fortune. Seriously, while his father's unstoppable business machine imploded under debt, the son stood there flexing his wealth, effectively becoming the billboard for dynastic collapse. He was the shiny hood ornament on a luxury car driving off a cliff at 100 miles per hour. While investors panicked and the billionaire father lost everything, Thor paraded around in sports cars, projecting an aura of untouchable arrogance. He didn't show a single ounce of humility. The fatal accident exposed the hollow core of the family myth, turning their financial tragedy into a tabloid spectacle. He provided the perfect visual metaphor for a spectacularly arrogant financial implosion. The crash destroyed the illusion. Arrogance leaves a stain. 30. He stole the car and crashed it. Qin Shi stole the first Chinese empire via a forged will, ruled with paranoia, killed his siblings, and collapsed the system in 3 years. His father spent a lifetime building a terrifying unified machine, and the son turned it into a flaming demolition site before the concrete dried. He executed the ultimate speedrun of Grand Theft Auto, instantly driving the stolen vehicle straight into an active volcano. He relied on brutal mass executions, terrified his generals, and created an environment where rebellion became the only logical option for survival. He pushed the self-destruct button repeatedly, truly wondering why the room was filling with smoke. He couldn't trust anyone. The peasants revolted, the military fractured, and the young tyrant was forced into sudden suicide, a masterclass in rapid self-destruction. Paranoia is a deadly poison. How fast can you destroy an empire? 31. The king was made of glass. Inheriting a recovering French kingdom, Charles VI lost his mind, believing he was physically made of glass and might shatter at any moment. A monarch ruling in sheer terror of becoming broken pottery inadvertently invited factional warfare and foreign opportunists to shred his kingdom. The nation was put on hold because the chief executive convinced himself he was a fragile vase and refused to leave the protective bubble wrap. He inserted iron rods into his clothes to prevent breaking, hiding in his dark chambers while his ambitious relatives violently tore the royal treasury apart. He wouldn't let anyone touch him. The kingdom drifted into a catastrophic civil war because the man holding the steering wheel was afraid of snapping into pieces. A tragic mental break handed the country over to hungry wolves. The throne became a fragile trap. Delusion shatters the mind. Did a king think he was glass? 32. Saying yes destroys everything. Inheriting Hungary, Vladislaus II became famous for just saying very well to every single demand from the nobles, fatally weakening royal authority. He politely agreed with everyone who actively wanted to steal his power, allowing the elite to strip the monarchy for parts right in front of him. He was a human terms and conditions button, automatically signing away his own authority without reading the fine print. The barons asked for tax cuts. He agreed. They demanded military control. He smiled and nodded. The central government withered away because the king possessed an allergic reaction to conflict. He didn't want to argue. He wanted to be liked, so he gave away the keys to the castle. The kingdom turned into a playground for greedy aristocrats, setting the stage for a devastating foreign conquest. Weakness invites destruction. Kindness kills the king. Does saying yes destroy a king? We need to stop the countdown. I'm breaking the fourth wall because looking at this list of pathetic clowns is exhausting. We've seen kings tripping in bathhouses, aristocrats inventing tiny bug guns, and emperors petting chickens while the world literally burns to ashes. But amidst all this supreme incompetence, one person actually deserves a Twisted Award. Patrick Reynolds is the true winner of this video. He didn't lose his empire because he was a drunken idiot, a paranoid tyrant, or a guy who thought his bones were made of fragile glass. He looked at the vast, toxic inheritance of his tobacco family and destroyed it on purpose, out of genuine conscience. He realized his legacy was a poison factory and chose to burn it down himself. He's the ultimate anomaly, an heir who used his power to bankrupt the evil that funded his childhood. We've seen the idiot, the drunk, and the noble destroyer, but who is the ultimate tragic end of the bloodline? 33. The bloodline collapsed on itself. Charles II of Spain was the tragic, biologically wrecked end of the Habsburgs. His fragile existence triggered a vast European succession war because inbreeding finally bred political extinction. Dynasties don't die from lack of money. They die from an overdose of arrogance, blindly assuming that power naturally transfers through biology. Who's the biggest spoiled disaster? Drop your pick below. The most savage, historically accurate roast gets pinned in the next video. Subscribe for more spectacular human failure.